Using a 13mm socket, go ahead and remove our ground terminal nut here. Now go ahead and spin the terminal loose. Work that off and set it aside. Disconnect your sensor right here. Pull out the vacuum tube. I'm going to loosen our intake tube hose clamps. Loosen that one and one on the other end. And once these are loose, let's go ahead and remove the air intake tube. Set that aside. So we'll go ahead and remove this cover. I'm going to use a pick and just pop out this little plastic button right here. Now normally there's going to be 3 of these. There should be 2 more right here. Ours were missing. There were a couple wire ties in place there. So we're simply going to cut and remove those. With those removed, grab your cover, pull it up, and remove it. Just going to disconnect our 2 sensors here. Now press in, slide that off. I'm going to do the same on this here. There's a little tab on the side. Pinch that tab and pull the connector off. Go ahead and pull off our vacuum hose. You want to come on back here to your EGR. You're going to pull off the vacuum port on the top. And then we're going to go ahead and use our 26mm wrench and we're going to loosen the EGR pipe. Let's go ahead and thread that right down. And slide that down. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to loosen and remove our 2 bolts for our throttle cable bracket. And once we have that out, we're going to kind of set that aside. We can pop our linkage off. Just snap that off the ball here, just a metal retainer clip. And I'm just going to throw the bolts back in the intake just to hold them. To move this sensor off of this unit here, press down on this tab. I'm just going to work that connector off. Now we're going to go ahead and disconnect these 3 ignition wires. I went ahead and took a Sharpie and I just labeled them 1, 2, and 3. And I'm just going to put front, middle, and rear. That way there, it'll be easy for us when we go to reconnect. We know that this is the first front, second middle, and the 3rd rear. Pinch these tabs and pull the wire off of the coil. Remove the 2 13mm nuts holding our coil base or bracket. There's a 3rd nut right here. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove that nut. Again, set that aside. On the back of the intake, we have a vacuum splitter right here. There was a brake booster hose. Let's go ahead and use our pliers and see if we can get this clamp loose. If this side is hard to get to, We're just going to come to the other side, to the brake booster side here, and simply remove that there and work this hose off. There are a couple other vacuum ports right here. Simply work those off. Just going to remove this unit here. There are 2 screws holding it. They're 7mm. I'm just going to go ahead and put our screws back in place. We have this unit right here that's just held on to this metal bracket right here. So use a screwdriver, pop that tab down. Let's go ahead and work this off. So we do spray a little bit of rust penetrant on here to loosen this. Let's go ahead and remove that unit off like that. Underneath, we have our Pcv valve right here. We're just going to pop that up and out of the valve cover. We're going to remove our bolts and studs from our upper intake plenum. There's a bolt in the back here, 13mm. This one, 2 side beside it here, and then there's one in the front. We're going to use a socket, swivel, and extension to get to the back one here. Grab your upper intake plenum. We're just gonna slowly swing it off to the side and just set that down over here. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna run some good old masking tape over our ports here. We wanna keep anything from falling down inside. You can use rags to fill the holes, towels, whatever you want. We're just gonna use what we have available, which is simple tape. Be easy enough to peel off and get rid of later on. Now right here is one of our fuel rails. Here's the other one. So we have 2 fuel rails, one for each of the 3 cylinders. And right here, this is a Schrader valve. And we're going to unscrew this cap here. Make sure you have safety glasses on. Recommended to have gloves on at this point here. We're going to use some towels right around here. And what we're going to do is we're going to depressurize our fuel rail system right here. You can use a small tool with a tip on it here. And we simply want to press down on that Schrader valve. And this should release any pressure in that line. And we have no high pressure coming through that at all, nothing built up. We're now going to go ahead and disconnect our fuel injector connectors here. Going to pinch in on the tabs on each side and pull up. And just pull up on the harness. Pull this back and away. Now our fuel rails here, or fuel lines, are attached to a bracket, and this bracket was bolted down here, but when we got our vehicle, there was no bolt securing that, so that is free. It's going to be good if you were able to unbolt that bracket right here. That's going to give you a little bit of leeway of moving these fuel lines around. Now we're going to come on down on the passenger bank of the engine, and the injector harness on the front side here has a little side clip on either side of it. I'm going to use a pick, and I'm going to pry up on one side and then come around the other side and pop that off. Now the two back injectors, much easier, just like the other side. Pinch on the side tabs, pinch and pull. Now our fuel rails have two 8mm bolts, 2 on each rail. Let's go ahead, loosen and remove those. We tried putting our socket in here, but it was hitting our valve cover stud here. And this is a capture stud, so you can't remove that completely to get your tool in there. So we're simply switching over to a wrench on the other side here. And we're going to go ahead and loosen. It'll take a little bit of time to do it, but go ahead and work that wrench and loosen and remove this bolt. Once we get this out, we're going to go ahead and repeat for the other side. Now that our injector rails are free and our injectors are wobbling around a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and tuck some towels down inside here, just to catch any residual fuel that might run out from our fuel rail or dribble out of our injectors. It's not going to flood out everywhere, but you might get some coming out. This will just help the cleaning process later on. So let's go ahead and grab our fuel rail here. And we're gently going to wiggle it upward. And we have our 3 fuel injectors right here. At this point, you can grab your injectors and twist those out. Pop your injectors out. Here's some fuel coming out of that fuel rail. That's why we have our towels right there. Now you want to go ahead and do this for the other 2 injectors. Same process for the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and replace your injectors, and then we'll go ahead and do the reinstallation. Go ahead and line your injector up with the rail. Go ahead and press this up inside. I'm going to go ahead and pull this towel out from here. Just remove these here once you're all swapped out. Let's go ahead and lower our injectors down into the engine here. We'll go ahead and push this fuel rail down and get our injectors to pop into the engine here. Make sure all of your injectors are seated. Once you can see that all of your injectors are seated, go ahead and install the bolts that are holding your fuel rail into place. Repeat the same process for the other side. So once you have your fuel rail bolts in, and go ahead and get these snug down. Repeat for the other three. Let's go ahead and install our injector harnesses. Line up your injector harness, press them on. You should hear those click and snap into place. Give those a little wiggle, make sure they don't pop off. We can now go ahead and remove our tape off of our intake. Let's go ahead and clean our clean our intake plenum area here. I want to make sure there's no residual gasket material. We have a paper towel here with some solvent on it. We're gonna go ahead and clean this. Now ours is pretty clean. If you end up having a bunch of residual gasket material, now's gonna be a prime time to take some paper towels, stuff them down inside your intake, make sure you have access to them. You're gonna need to pull that out again. But then you wanna go ahead and clean the top of the surface here. You don't wanna have little pieces of gasket material dropping down inside your engine. Now in doing this job here, it's always best to go ahead and replace the gasket. It's just good insurance that we're not going to end up with a leak here. Just set that in place. Don't forget to clean the bottom of your upper intake. Once again, a solvent on a towel or rag should be plenty sufficient for this here. Now when you're bringing our intake down, you want to get that EGR tube installed into your EGR. And for simplicity, we're going to take our PCV, line it up, push it into our valve cover. And if you want, go ahead and get that EGR tube nut, just thread in a couple threads. Now let's get our intake bolts in. You'll lift this up a little bit, line up that stud. Same with this one here. Go ahead and maneuver the intake around, get that gasket lined up. Just gonna get those started, a couple threads. Beside it go the other two long studs. The very front is the last short stud. And the last bolt, flathead bolt, goes in the back. Now we're just going to snug these down. We're not going to over tighten them. I'm going to start by torquing these bolts down to 11 foot-pounds. And then we're going to do a final torque to 18. On the back side of the engine, we're going to hook up our vacuum ports here. Bring this unit over here. Once we have those in place, we'll go ahead and line up our ignition coil here. Let's go ahead and get those 3 nuts installed. Go ahead and get those snug down. Go ahead and repeat for the other 2. I'm going to just snug these down. Okay, run your vacuum port over, pop that onto your EGR. Hook up your lower vacuum port to the EGR tube. We're going to apply a little bit of dielectric grease around this here. So hook up your connector here. Let's go ahead and tighten our EGR tube here. Make sure that's pretty snug. Let's go ahead and hook up our vacuum hose here. Hook up our throttle body harness, our idle air control. Now when we got our vehicle in here, we could clearly see that our ignition wires were not run in the proper location here. The heat from the EGR tube had melted through our ignition wires and our plastic sheathing. This wire here is run underneath, so we're going to go ahead and get this fixed up. You want to make sure that all of your wires are properly run in the correct areas. And take your vacuum hose for the brake booster. Go ahead and get that installed. I'm going to remove our bolts that we just kind of stuck back in there earlier. Let's bring up our throttle unit here, and here is our throttle cable. Going to snap this into place. Good, line up a bracket. Let's get our bolts installed. Just going to spin these in as far as I can by hand. We'll just snug those down. You don't want to make them super tight, but enough. So once that bolt bottoms out, about a quarter of a turn, and you'll be good. Now our EGR tube wrap, it started to come apart. We want to try and use this here because you don't want this unit to melt vacuum hoses or ignition, anything like that. We're just going to throw a metal band clamp in here, or hose clamp, to secure this in place. I'm going to install our throttle bracket here, install our plastic push pin. We're able to source some plastic lock buttons here. Get rid of the old zip ties that someone had in there previous. Install your Schrader cap for your fuel pressure rail here. And just thread that right down into place. And we have our ignition wires here. We previously labeled them 3 rear. Snap that on. That'll be 2. And our 1. Sneak that on through there. Let's install our air intake tube. Get that onto our throttle body. Put the other end onto our air box. We're going to install our temp sensor here. Must have been broken previously. Had some tape on there. Go ahead and line that up. Install our Vacuum tube here. Let's tighten down our air intake tube clamps here. Just want to make sure those are snug. Let's go ahead and grab our negative terminal, pop that on. Let's go ahead and tighten down this side. And once that snugs down, you're all set. Now with the vehicle running, you go ahead and take a look, and you want to check for any leaking fuel injectors at this point here, or any fuel collecting on the lower part of the intake. Ours is nice and dry, and our engine is running nice and smooth, so it should be all set.